Bring the horns in. We going all in.
Because I began working inside men's prisons at 18 years old and continued to teach and be with men inside. And so it was obvious, one, I never went to a prison where they didn't know who my dad was. And they were very clear about highlighting for us, like, we have these programs because of Attica. We have, your dad is the reason we have these kind of books, or I can get letters in Spanish. So I was lucky enough to be able to be in spaces where the impact of what he had contributed and what those men had contributed was really felt. I feel like New York State Prison is actually a very good place to be able to feel like what happened made a difference. And I also spent time working in California prisons, and there too, the same thing. Like, it was a very pivotal moment, inside and outside, but I think that I saw the impact. I saw the things that shifted, positively and negatively, right? I also could see the ways in which they clearly worked very hard to isolate people that they thought would be hard to control. So you saw a lack of kind of politicizing population too, right? Like them being afraid anytime that they started to see that. And California was a very good example of that. They distracted them so much with colors and northerner, southerner, and red and blue and Aryan and other, and they did so much stuff that you realize, like, what a smart strategic thing to make sure that everybody's terrified and angry of each other so that we could never again have that moment. It's interesting.
What was some of the good that came out of Attica in prisons?
So, like I said, the letters being able to be received in languages other than English. There was an increase in, I think, the literature that was allowed to come in. I know that there were a lot more programs that were coming in. My mother's definitely a better source of that than I am. I also think that, that they began to demand things for themselves, like Muslims having their meals or the kosher meals, or, that there was kind of a self-actualization that came out of that, of men and women feeling like they had the right to be treated humanely inside, and that the conditions mattered. That their incarceration wasn't a reason to not be treated with respect and dignity. And whether that was upheld in every facility or not, obviously we haven't seen that. But I think that there was an actualization and a realization about people's, right to things that I think we still see that. I think that that's how all these, clubs and stuff, these advocacy groups that live inside prisons. I believe that all of that comes from that moment. I don't think we were always aware it was different, as you know. We had our own little village and hub, so I was around other children for whom their experiences were the same, so I think it took some time to figure out, like, oh, we're not regular. We don't have outside friends. So I think I did understand early that my dad was different. Mostly because the reaction to him was not always positive, and the stories that I heard about him or how people responded to him was very different than the gentle dad that I knew. I think right now, at this very moment in this country, I feel incredibly grateful that I grew up with the parents that I had, who taught me to question early and challenge everything, who taught loyalty, and the concept of family in a very different way than I see now. Discretion with information, discernment in relationship. I think that these are things that I felt annoyed by, like I felt like my parents were paranoid. And now I feel like I'm the only one out of anybody I know who knows how to manage surveillance and different things. I think, people often ask me about my dad. Like, I think people think because he's always associated with armed struggle that he was that kind of this like forceful, intense energy. But my dad was deeply rooted in love. Like, everything he did was an expression of his love for people, and violence or armed struggle for him was a consequence that might be required, but never the first resort. I think one of the things about Attica is that the whole energy of it is it's so much about the violence. And it's not about what I think is really a deep spiritual kind of unfolding that happened there. And so for me, it's like growing up with my parents, they were political, but they were also deeply rooted in spirit, and they were deeply rooted in principle. And so I feel like I grew up with a profound respect for the earth and for people and for voice.
Bring the horns in. We going all in.